Tonight's headlines: a deadly terror attack on U.S. Marines in Kuwait, a new CIA warning of dangers from Iraq, and microscopic clues in the sniper manhunt. Plus, inside the mind of a sniper, how he chooses and uses his weapon. Eye on America. Science enters a new field: growing drugs inside crops. Is it safe? And the numbers and the people keep growing. The government's new numbers on obesity.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. Again today, Americans became targets for terrorists who struck with deadly effect. But this time, the Americans they chose were capable of fighting back. They were U.S. Marines. The attack came on an island in the Persian Gulf where U.S. military forces are engaged in Operation Eager Mace, training exercises held in the region every year since the Gulf War. CBS's David Martin pieced together the facts.
It happened during a break in an urban warfare exercise like this involving 1,000 Marines on an island off the coast of Kuwait. Two men dressed in civilian clothes drove a pickup truck to a Marine position, got out, and opened fire with AK-47s, hitting two of the Americans.
Both Marines were wounded and medevaced to the Armed Forces Hospital in Kuwait City. One Marine later died of his wounds. The other remains hospitalized.
The two men jumped back in their pickup truck and drove to another Marine position, but this time the Marines, no doubt alerted by the sound of gunfire, were ready and opened fire first, killing the two men. The Kuwaiti government has identified the two dead men as Kuwaiti citizens and is calling the shooting a terrorist attack.
U.S. intelligence is still trying to determine whether either man belonged to al-Qaeda or any other terrorist group. A Kuwaiti source says one of the men had the same last name as several members of a large Kuwaiti clan who are being held prisoner by the U.S. at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
The Marines were training in urban warfare at a time when the Pentagon is planning to send troops into Baghdad. They have temporarily returned to their ships, but they are part of a much larger Marine force that would be involved in an invasion of Iraq. That, too, could have been the reason for the attack. But whatever the motive, it was strong enough to convince two Kuwaitis to undertake what amounted to a suicide mission. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
The Marines involved in today's action are with the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit from Camp Pendleton, California. Their base of operations is a specialized warship that carries aircraft, amphibious landing craft, and tanks. CBS News contributor Kirk Spitzer was with them.
The men in Kuwait are operating from this ship, the USS Denver, a huge transport vessel that carries 1,000 Marines with everything they need to survive in a place like Kuwait, or for that matter, Iraq. Although these maneuvers are an annual event, this year everyone involved was thinking about a possible assault on Baghdad. While the Marines on the ground were coming under fire, the sailors on board ship were training for another kind of attack, a terrorist assault from small boats.
Probably the one that we watch the closest is a small boat. And the reason for that is, one, there are a lot of small boats that will be out there. Two, they move very fast by comparison to a large ship like Denver.
The mysterious explosion aboard a French tanker off the coast of Yemen this week brought that threat into even sharper focus. It was in Yemen 2 years ago that al-Qaeda terrorists killed 17 sailors aboard the USS Cole. Today's attack is a reminder that the threat only grows larger when U.S. forces go onshore in a region that may be moving from war games to the real thing. Kirk Spitzer, CBS News, Bahrain.
In Baghdad today, Saddam Hussein again denied he has weapons of mass destruction and said the only reason the United States has for attacking Iraq is to force the Iraqi people to grovel. But in his speech last night in Cincinnati, President Bush carefully laid out his arguments for a decisive showdown soon with Saddam.
Some have argued that confronting the threat from Iraq could detract from the war against terror. To the contrary, confronting the threat posed by Iraq is crucial to winning the war on terror. If the Iraqi regime is able to produce, buy, or steal an amount of highly enriched uranium a little larger than a single softball, it could have a nuclear weapon in less than a year. Facing clear evidence of peril, we cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud. Understanding the threats of our time, knowing the designs and deceptions of the Iraqi regime, we have every reason to assume the worst, and we have an urgent duty to prevent the worst from occurring.
President Bush speaking in Cincinnati last night. The president expects to get the war resolution he wants, and soon. The House of Representatives opened formal debate on it today and is likely to pass it on Thursday. CBS News Chief White House correspondent John Roberts has more about that and about the concern that pressuring Saddam could make him more dangerous. John, what about that?
Dan, as Congress opened its debate on Iraq today, it received a chilling new warning that Saddam Hussein could lash out against the United States in frightening fashion if he feels his back is against the wall.
It was CIA Director George Tenet who raised the alarm in a newly declassified letter provided to Congress warning, while Saddam for now appears to be drawing a line short of conducting terrorist acts with conventional or chemical or biological weapons, he would probably become much less constrained in adopting terrorist action if he believes a military strike is inevitable. The declaration gave some lawmakers second thoughts about going to war, but others saw no reason to trust Saddam to behave.
We waited too long to deal with the gathering threat in Afghanistan. And because of that delay, 3,000 innocent Americans lost their lives. We must not make that mistake again.
President Bush hopes a strong congressional resolution will force the United Nations Security Council to get on board. France is holding up the UN measure, but White House sources say the president already has at least 17 nations lined up for a coalition and will use that backing to strike Saddam if the UN fails to act.
But if we have to, then we'll have the best plans. The full force and fury of the United States military will be unleashed. And make no mistake about it, we will prevail.
President Bush will telephone French President Chirac tomorrow to try to move the UN process along, but now there's a possible delay in the Senate, with West Virginia's Robert Byrd threatening to block the resolution there. That could hold up a vote on the measure until next week. Dan?
John Roberts reporting live tonight from the White House. Thanks. In suburban Washington, the hunt goes on tonight for the serial sniper who has shot 8 people in the past week, killing 6 of them, seriously injuring one school child. Clues are few. And with the gunman still at large, CBS's Joey Chen reports how area residents are coping.
Anxious and brave, parents and their children came to school today, just one day after the sniper's bullet struck a 13-year-old boy standing outside Tasker Middle School. Police today were everywhere.
Come on, sweetie, because we're running a little late, okay?
Many parents were also on patrol. Officials had asked the community to resist the impulse to stay safely at home, but even those who ventured out were wary.
You know, now I just have to start wondering whether there's cover around where I'm dropping the kids off.
He hops out of the car and gets on the bus because I don't want him to be a sitting duck.
Normalcy is the key here, but let's face it, it's on our minds all the time.
It is for investigators, too. On an empty lot less than 150 yards from where the young victim was standing, searchers found a shell casing that's now being tested.
It was on the same side as the school. And could it have been, ejected from the weapon that the suspect used is very possible.
And investigators are checking out over 1,200 phone tips, including the one that led to this search last night. It didn't pan out. Even as they follow up on the leads that have been called in, police are asking for more. They want the public to be on the lookout for different kinds of cases that could be used to conceal a weapon. As another day passed without an arrest, the police chief insisted his team is not grasping at straws.
If you have become impatient because no one's in custody, then I ask you to check yourself. Americans have a real tendency to be impatient. So I'm sorry that it hasn't met your timeline.
Tonight, police are still looking for any indication that the killer spree may have begun even before last week's shootings. Investigators looking at old police records have found at least one case which might be linked, but the ballistics tests are so far inconclusive. Dan?
Live from Rockville, Maryland, Joey Chen. The police, of course, want to know as much as they can about the kind of person that they're dealing with. To learn more about serial snipers in general and their weapons of choice, CBS's Mark Strassman talked to an expert at a rifle range.
It's empty, though. Rounds forward into the chamber. And then he's watching.
Stalking. Eric Haney knows the mind of a sniper. Haney is a founding member of Delta Force, the U.S. Army's elite counterterrorism unit, and a trainer of sniper teams. He imagines Maryland sniper and the countdown to a killing.
At that point, he takes a breath. He lets out a little bit. He relaxes. And he squeezes the shot off.
For urban shooting, a .223 caliber high-intensity hunting rifle, like the Maryland snipers, like Haney's AR-15, is ideal, he says. High velocity and devastating at ranges up to a quarter mile.
He's picked the right weapon, at least.
Well, yes, he has. For the purposes, it is. Unfortunately, it's the useful weapon for the kind of perversions that he's committing.
From this rifle, a .223 round would be lightweight, powerful, and deadly. Remember that water jug? This is the impact from that one bullet. And remember, the human body is also mostly made of water.
For instance, when the 13-year-old student was shot yesterday, as the .223 caliber bullet entered his abdomen, all its energy radiated outward, erupting through his spleen, stomach, pancreas, lungs, and diaphragm, leaving him critically wounded.
It was a complicated operation in the sense that there were multiple injuries that he sustained.
He's a Special Forces Rambo-type wannabe.
Haney believes for Maryland sniper, the operation is not so complicated. A high-powered rifle, a secluded setting, innocence in the crosshairs. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Atlanta.
Coming up next on the CBS Evening News, he's kept himself out of sight and kept quiet since 9/11. Finally, the FBI's former chief faces tough questions. And then later, Eye on America. You are not supposed to eat this new corn, but what's inside it might cure diseases. Police in Malaysia said today a U.S. citizen wanted as part of an alleged al-Qaeda cell based in Oregon has turned himself in. U.S. authorities want him handed over, but a Malaysian judge put off a decision on that when the suspect requested asylum. In a separate development, a federal judge in Buffalo, New York, granted bail today to one of 6 alleged members of another al-Qaeda cell. The other 5 All-Americans will remain in jail. In the congressional investigation of intelligence failures leading up to the 9/11 attacks, the public heard for the first time today from a key player who has repeatedly come under criticism. CBS's Bob Schieffer covered the hearing. Bob, tell us about it.
Well, Dan, the former FBI Director Louis Freeh finally got a chance to tell his side of the story, and he really unloaded on Congress.
Far from fumbling the job, he told Congress that time after time, agents were heroes.
It was amazing to me that this part of the scene was always the same. FBI men and women, whether it was New York City, Tehran, Aden, Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, exhausted, many sick and dehydrated, working until they literally dropped in some cases, down on their knees, digging with their fingers.
In the strongest terms, Freeh denied the FBI had overlooked clues that should have alerted the government an attack was coming. And then he threw the problem right back in Congress's face. For 3 years, he said, Congress held back the resources that the FBI knew were necessary to fight terrorists. During those years, he said he requested money to hire more than 1,800 new agents, analysts, and linguists. He got 76. In fiscal year 2000 alone, he said he asked for $380.8 million and to hire 864 people to fight terrorism. Congress gave him $7.4 million and let him hire 5 new people.
To win a war, it takes soldiers. But even after September 11th, the FBI has less FBI agents today, 11,516 special agents, than it had in 1999.
For the most part, Congress listened in silence, but Freeh's statements were in stark contrast to allegations in a book by 2 Clinton administration National Security Council staffers. They told Dan Rather in an interview for 60 Minutes, too, that Freeh's FBI withheld information even from the White House because Freeh just didn't like then-President Clinton.
He held the president in contempt. He was determined to bolster the independence of the FBI, did not take orders from Attorney General Reno, and really was unwilling to cooperate with the White House.
Free has declined CBS request to respond to that. As for the committee, it seemed content to let him have his say and did not really challenge him today. Dan?
Live on Capitol Hill, Bob Schieffer. Thanks, Bob. Still ahead on the CBS Evening News, Eye on America. These ears of corn will make your eyes pop. Wait till you see what's really growing inside them. On the CBS Market Watch, President Bush today became the first president in a quarter century to invoke the Taft-Hartley Act, asking a federal court to order the reopening of West Coast ports. The president says the 11-day-old lockout of dock workers could cripple the economy and force thousands of Americans out of work. On Wall Street, stocks rallied some today. The Dow gained more than 78 points. The Nasdaq was up about 10. One potential growth market is something called farming. That's spelled with a PH. It's an amazing type of research that could revolutionize the health field. CBS's Wyatt Andrews gives you an eyeful and earful in tonight's Eye on America.
It's out in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, an island of corn in an ocean of soybeans. It's planted by design in splendid isolation because the real product being grown on this plot isn't corn. The real product is a drug called a protein.
This is being grown in this product in this ear right here.
It's in the
It is in the ear, and the kernels of corn.
Tony Laus is the CEO of Protogene, one of several biotech companies now in business to grow drugs in crops. Inside these ears of corn are the seeds of a brand new growth industry. The USDA this year has issued 32 field permits for companies to grow drugs and drug compounds in tobacco, rice, barley, and corn. And the list of what's being grown is revolutionary. Plant-based insulin, vaccines for hepatitis B, cholera, and diarrhea. There have even been greenhouse attempts to grow spermicide. Next year, the biotech firm Epicyte will be the first to start human clinical tests on a gel to treat herpes. That drug, too, is being grown in corn.
In our case, we're looking at preventing herpes simplex virus infections. Instead of spending several $100 million and waiting 5 years to build a factory, you can actually increase the amount of antibody that you can make by growing more corn.
Do you see this one day reducing the costs for drugs that we pay as consumers?
Yes, I do.
So that's the promise. Here's the problem. How will they keep the herpes treatment or any other drug out of cornflakes?
It's not going to happen.
Tony Laus says there are strict government rules for the isolation of this corn. This plot must be a minimum of a quarter of a mile away from other corn, and the harvest must be gathered and stored in virtual quarantine.
Not going to get in the cornflakes.
How can you be so sure?
How can I be so sure? Because I'm following the procedures that makes it impossible for that to happen.
But that's what industry also said about Starlink corn, a biotech variety not approved for food, the day before they found Starlink in taco shells. It had been mixed by mistake in the field. Greg Jaffe, who tracks biotech food, praises the new planting rules, but warns the government has no plans to test conventional corn for another biotech accident.
They should be checking on those forms to see that the non-pharmaceutical corn, in fact, doesn't have any contamination in it.
Government regulators tell CBS News this time they know what they are doing, and they will have to prove that soon. In the coming harvest, there's a new crop of experimental medicine embedded in the amber waves of grain. In central Nebraska, Wyatt Andrews for Eye on America.
We lost a member of our CBS Evening News family today, the senior member, in fact, Lynn Raff. Lynn joined this broadcast as a film editor more than 50 years ago when Doug Edwards sat in the anchor chair. For the next half-century, Lynn helped CBS News bring you the pictures of some of the greatest moments in history on film and later videotape. For those of us who had the privilege of working with Lynn Raff, this is the picture we will remember. Thank you, Lynn. We will miss you. We end tonight with news about this country's growing, and it is still growing, weight problem. The latest studies find 1/3 of American adults, 59 million people, now meet the medical definition of obese, meaning they are at least 1/3 heavier than normal. But one of the most worrisome trends is the number of overweight children in this country. There are now 9 million of them. That's tripled since the 1980s. And people tend to put on more weight as they age. Being overweight takes a heavy toll on health and health care costs. Among other things, obesity is linked to diabetes, stroke, heart disease, high blood pressure, and several types of cancer. Simply put, the government said today, and I quote, "The problem keeps getting worse." And that's part of our world tonight. Dan Rather inviting you to join us again tomorrow for news that matters on the CBS Evening News. Good night.
For news 24 hours a day, go to cbsnews.com, AOL keyword CBS News. Blind and discriminated against, Eye on America goes undercover tomorrow. Experience CBS News.